I'd like to welcome everyone to presentation this morning on managing the audit process. It's going to be presented by Phil Herr, who had a distinguished career with the U.S. General Accounting Office and is going to share some of his experience and knowledge with us this morning. So, Phil.
Good, Ray. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's great to be here. I want to thank Ray and his colleagues at the Decisions Analysis Partners for getting me involved with this, the TDA for sponsoring the work that's been going on there in Brazil. It's good to be with this group again. I was there in August for the conference, and what I'd like to do today is just I've been asked to talk a little bit about managing the audit process, so I'll talk about some of my experience at GAO. And some of the, I've also done other work with consulting and things like that. So hopefully these ideas can be helpful to you all as you consider the work you do in the different audit courts in Brazil. I'm going to talk a little bit, but later I'll mention this is scheduled for an hour and a half. I'd ask that people, if they have questions, they could be sent to the chat, and then our colleagues there, Livio, I think, and maybe another person will pick some questions that I could address at the end of the presentation. I think that would be easier. And then the other thing for my benefit and also for the benefit of the translator, we'll pause. Could I ask everyone to mute their microphones, please, so that we're getting a little bit of feedback?
Por favor, pessoal, obrigado. Microfone. You can go on.
Okay. Sanandra, did you want to do a quick translation of what I just said?
He's on a different channel.
He's on a different channel. Okay.
Yeah, it's simultaneous translation, Phil.
Okay, very good. Good. So let's move into the discussion then. So I to start with, obviously, I think for those experienced with auditing, well-functioning teams are key to the quality of the audit process, and they're the basis for compliance with standards and ethical responsibilities. Teams also need a solid organizational foundation to succeed. And I'm going to talk about how that has been implemented at GAO. I think that it's that some of the ways that GAO has organized itself, and then it's also some things that I've seen. So in my experience with the GAO, and also doing some consulting work with national and state audit offices, and also with OLACEF. So I did have the opportunity to be at the OLACEF's meetings that were held in Gramado a few years ago. Well, maybe it's been a little like 10 or 12 years now. But I've and had some other opportunities to travel in Brazil, so it's really a great pleasure to be with you all. Some of the challenges that I see facing large audit offices, and I think certainly Brazil with a large population, you have challenges that come with larger organizations. I mean, the things that I've seen in my career and in consulting, certainly managing talent. Breaking down organizational silos and communicating, and that's reflected in some of the questions that have come in, the areas that I've been asked to talk about today. Developing and maintaining expertise is another challenge for audit offices. I think we see, as I reflect on my career doing audit work, there's been a tremendous change in the methodologies that have been used, but also in the topics that we've been asked to address. Things, we've gone from, in that period of time, we've gone from, yes.
One moment, sorry for interrupting you. A tradução não está saindo no canal da tradução.
Acabei de testar. Yes, the interpretation in Portuguese is not available. It is available, but we just listen to English in both audio channels. Sanandra, can you test your mic again, please?
Eu só preciso saber, desculpa, Daniel, eu não posso mutar você, é isso? Porque eu estava mutando todo mundo que estava aberto o microfone.
Então foi isso.
Foi isso, desculpa, gente, perdão. Eu tenho que deixar do Daniel e do Phil, não é isso? E pronto, Sandra. Então a Sandra tem que abrir de novo, por favor. Desculpem, fui eu mesmo.
Suzana, é o Sanandra, o nome
Ah,
dele.
tá. Ok, obrigada.
Sanandra. Okay. Sorry, Phil, a bit of a confusion here. Please
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay. Do you want me to go back a slide or just continue from here?
Your slides aren't
Pode
showing.
voltar. Pode. Desculpa, Ray. Sorry, Ray. We can't hear anything that Ray said.
Oh, right. Can you see the slides? Is everything, is that set at this point?
I don't know maybe it's just me.
Sim,
Yes.
yes.
Okay. Okay. So,
You can see the slides.
okay. So, tell you what, if something's not working, raise your hand and wave at me, Livio, and or Ray, and let me know. So the challenges that I see facing large audit offices based on my career, managing talent. I mean, audits, obviously the key to getting the work done are the people, but also breaking down organizational silos and enhancing communication, developing and maintaining specialized expertise, maintaining quality, which is paramount for the audit profession, ensuring ethics and independence, being proactive to manage change, but also innovating. And I think in my experience, audit offices tend to innovate a little more slowly than the rest of government offices or society. Partly, I think, because of the nature of the mandate. I think partly also to sort of catch up with changes. But I'll talk a little bit about how I've seen that play out and how I've seen organizations adapt in terms of their processes to advance. These are the topics that I'm going to cover today. I'm going to mention first the format. We'll talk about a 90-minute presentation, 30 minutes for questions and answers. I'm going to suggest and take a 30-minute, or I'm sorry, a 5-minute break after an hour. Maybe that partly for the benefit of the translation for Sanandra and also for myself, for folks that might want to, just step away for a moment at that point. But I found that if I'm talking for the entire 2 hours, it gets to be a bit much for my, so that it might hopefully make it a better presentation. So things I'm going to cover, though, some examples. I mentioned one large audit organization, that would be GAO, but ethics and integrity, building on acquired knowledge, leveraging staff skills, audit team formation and communication, deadline control. I think that is the bane of an auditor's existence, is trying to meet deadlines and with a moving and evolving environment. And then it was also asked to talk about behavior skills of team managers and conflict management. And conflict is definitely a part of all lives. All organizationals. There's invariably some types of conflict come into play. I'm going to talk about some ideas and ways I've seen to effectively manage that. So in managing public audit organizations, things that I think are crucial based on my experience, clear guidance, so we'll talk more about that. Also define work processes and structure. It's not to say that the structure drives everything and every decision, but more to the point here that the structure can provide some continuity across organizational groups. A work culture committed to quality is paramount as well, from the top to the bottom of the organization. Ongoing training, internal and external, such as the kind of thing we're doing today. Change management, and then assimilating new hires. And I think this last bullet on assimilating new staff to an organization, I mean, really, it's really a broader perspective. It's bringing in new people, but that is not to say that it's also important to help people in mid-career and later career make their contributions to an organization, but to manage the talent that the organizations have in order to do their work most effectively. So it's not to, but that the bringing in new people into the organization is an important dimension. One of the things that I talked with one of the colleagues in Brazil in August was how GAO has a rotational program to bring new staff into the organization, and how giving people different experiences, exposing them to different types of opportunities can be an important part of an organization as well. So I mentioned here the GAO approach to managing audits. I'm gonna talk a little bit about how it's structured. I think this gives you an idea of the framework where I'm coming from, but also how some of these kind of things, these ideas have been applied. So a GAO has set up 16 teams to cover core issues and programs. And so by that, for example, there's a team that covers transportation, there's a team that covers healthcare, there's a team that covers education. But those are broad topics, but underneath these different topics like transportation, I'll talk more about that. I headed that team for 5 years and worked in that team the last 10 years of my career. So talk about how that plays out. But the other thing that GAO does and has done better at in the last 20 years or so is what we call matrix work, which is looking at cross-cutting topics. So for example, cybersecurity, work on cybersecurity might bring together people working on aviation. It might bring together people working on cybersecurity issues and also IT issues, emergency response, environmental issues are things that cut across these different issue areas. And I think that has been that's been one of the ways that we've been able to leverage staff expertise. An internal training institute is also established as a nice facility on the seventh floor of the headquarters building with video conference technology, the ability to bring people together from different field offices. But that's been a really important part of the organization that was formally established about 30 years ago with internal training, but also bringing in outside speakers, such as I'm doing today. Hiring and staff development programs are very robust. There's an annual performance cycle, and I'm sure, I guess most government offices have this, but there's a formal process of setting expectations mid-year and end-of-year feedback that is also reflected in the teams that are mentioned there in terms of the organizational structure, do an assessment of each individual, provide compensation and annual compensation raises and bonuses as well through that process. And then, of course, organizations need promotion opportunities to keep people moving into new roles. One of the things that I think, sort of managing audits, as people move up in the organization, there's an emphasis on improving supervisory skills. But there's the phrase there, the last bullet, 360-degree feedback. It reflects that when an individual moves into a more senior position, they're asked to get anonymous feedback via surveys on how they manage, the areas that they can improve on. And that is shared with an external party that gives it back in an anonymous version to these individuals. And to me, it shows a commitment on the part of the organization to help people improve, but also see maybe some blind spots that they might have developed in their work. Generally, when people get these 350-degree surveys, the people who supervise them tend to rate them very highly, and the people that work for them, their ratings may not be as effusive. But I think that's the important part of that. Certainly the person making the promotion decision thinks well of that individual, but it helps someone round out their perspective on what they do. And then individualized mentoring is appropriate too. But in say managing audits, I think I guess the point I'd like to make with this slide is that managing audits, it's more than just managing the nuts and bolts of who to interview and what to analyze, but it's also managing people, because that's also at the end of the day a very core part of the function. So just a little bit about when you talk about audit teams, this is an example of what it looks like at GAO. I know it differs with the audit courts. I know it differs from the TCU there in Brazil. At GAO, there's one person that heads the organization, the Comptroller General. It's a 15-year term, which is very unusual in the US government. It's one of the longest terms other than a Supreme Court justice, which is for life. It is a political process in that the Congress, the House and Senate nominate candidates, and the president makes picks from the list of people that he or she is given. At this point, thus far, we've only had a male president, and thus far, we've only had a male comptroller general in the U.S., and that has been since 1921. So, but it's a unique position in government. Beneath the comptroller general, there's a chief operating officer. There's about 3,200 employees, and I'm just going to briefly just the idea here of this hierarchy. You'll see how this plays out in terms of how the audits are managed. So we have a managing director. That was the role that I had in my last few years at GAO. My last 5 years, I was a managing director of the physical infrastructure team. We had about 175 employees in my team. Some teams are a little smaller, some are bigger. We have, I had a team of senior executives, 6 that worked for me. They manage about 8 to 10 teams. Then we have assistant directors, analysts in charge. So but what the other thing GAO has done is it has the teams are supported by attorneys, methodologists, communications analysts. Visual communications analyst is another way of saying graphic artists, people that can help develop graphics, use photos, help make the reports more interactive. One of the challenges that we saw with the reports at GAO was that they were heavy on words, often very long, and people said, "Gee, it's interesting," but people absorb and understand or receive information differently. We're in a much more interactive media culture now. And so we as an organization had to adapt to that. So as an example, in the team that I was managing, there was some attorneys that were dedicated to support the team, but also methodologists. And we had several communications analysts that worked with teams. And then we also had 2 visual communications analysts that work with teams to develop graphics to make the work more interactive. So I mentioned other in-team support. We talk about there's a staffing manager role, report reviewers. The staffing manager, I'm going to talk about this role a little bit later, but this is a very important function to manage audit teams in my experience at GAO. And it's something we had to create the position because we needed to, one, help bring in new staff when we were to manage hiring, but also to manage how we form the team. So, and then there's also centralized organization, centralized quality control in the organization. So once a report leaves my team, it's been approved, it still goes through another layer of quality review. So it goes back to that emphasis on quality, that focus on trying to ensure that the reports are clear, they're concise, they're easily readable, and that they can be readily understood. We being, organizations like GAO understand that people are no longer reading 200-page reports. I'm not sure, maybe they never did, but we have to understand that, or we had to learn and we had to internalize the fact that we needed to be more communicative. So one thing you will also see in a report that's put out by GAO and other audit offices now is a 1-page summary at the front of the report. So I would, and the reports are available. Virtually all reports GAO does are available at the website if you want to look at those as well. So turning to just some of the topics that I was asked to address in more depth, ethics and integrity were certainly one. And I think as I think about and reflect on the career that I've had, these are the principles that really provide a framework for audit work. But the phrase "tone at the top" appears in different guidance that GAO puts out. But the tone at the top is really the tone, is the tone that's set by the manager, set by the leadership, set by the judges in the audit courts. But saying, this is the work matters, but it has to be done the right way. It has to be done following ethics, and it has to be done with integrity. One way what leaders say and how they act certainly matters. I think for those in leadership positions, people realize, and I'm sure, if they make a statement publicly or they make a statement in a meeting to their team, people pay attention. If they say that there's going to be an increase in the budget or a change in staffing, people note that and they pay close attention. So that tone matters a lot in managing audits. One other thing that GAO does is there's a lot of emphasis on potential conflicts of interest. So anytime an audit team is formed, the first thing people are asked is if they have any potential conflicts. And so, you know, an example of a potential conflict of interest could be that my spouse works for another entity or an office that's being audited. In my case, my wife worked for an organization or organizations that contracted with the government. So if any of the work touched on an area that she was working on, I would need to disclose that. And then depending on the type of issue, you know, I might need to be removed from that particular assignment. So, but that's done on each assignment. People are asked to, you know, formally document that. One example of a potential conflict of interest, one of the teams at GEO does work on banking and housing. And they have a policy that if a person owns one share of stock in a bank, they are unable to do work on banking issues. It's an example of how seriously that is taken. In some cases, people say that they own individual stocks and they're working on healthcare topics. So if they're working on a job related to pharmaceutical pricing, they might be asked to step aside. So the other thing that GAO has, which might be unique, I don't know, maybe it's also a function of a large organization, is there is a neutral party, an independent ethics office. It's headed by a very senior and experienced attorney. I have personally worked with him on potential ethical issues that I've seen come up in my team. But that's an important role if maybe it's a new concept. But having someone who's a little bit outside the fray of these kind of decisions at a team level can be very helpful to make sure that there is a consistent policy across the organization. So I think these kind of things can be really important in thinking about managing the audit process because they can help ensure fairness. They can also ensure unbiased reporting. If someone has a potential conflict, it can be harder to be honest in their assessment. And I was working with another country once. I was trying to explain the concept of conflict of interest. And I said, well, for example, if one of my parents, this was an issue related to a border on the US border with one of the neighboring countries. Well, there's only two nations that border the US, so you can probably guess which one it might be. But I said, well, for example, if one of my parents was a mayor of a border community, and the work we were doing was focused on things moving back and forth across the border in terms of commercial transportation. I said, that would be a potential conflict for me. And the person was genuinely surprised. They said, why would that be a conflict? So, you know, it's some of these kind of things may, you know, in the US environment, they may seem a little unusual, you know, given practices in other countries, but this is something that is done with GAO. Ethics and principles, a couple of things that come in some of the other publications. We certainly talk about public interest, integrity, objectivity. The point the comment that I was just making here on independence of mind and appearance, maintaining an attitude of impartiality, intellectual honesty, being free of conflicts of interest. And this last part, a continuing assessment of relationships with audited entities and stakeholders. Stakeholders is a word that's used a lot more in English now, but it generally means people that are affected by a particular project and audit. But in this case, a continuing assessment of relationships could be someone might offer an auditor a job. It's not uncommon. And if they do, then that can also affect someone's ability to be partial or impartial, I guess is a better way to say it, in these situations. So this is, you know, part of these principles to managing audits, proper use of government information, resources, and positions. That really covers, you know, in many times auditors are privy to sensitive information. You may be privy to information that could be useful financially in the sense that a company may be about to be awarded a contract. If some of the work that's been discussed with decision analysis partners focuses on procurement. So you may learn that a company is, if they get a new contract, it may be good for their stock price. It may make a company a more attractive investment, but people need to be very careful about how that information is used as well. And then professional behavior and complying with obligations, avoiding any sort of conduct that brings the audit work into question. So I think when I see these kind of principles, I think as organizations develop and as people work their way up into an organization, they find that they sort of internalize these things. There are other things I'll talk about a little bit more in today about how some of these kinds of some practices GEO's developed that can help kind of keep track and monitor this on a regular basis. Okay, so one way that that's done is through the annual financial disclosure and declaration of assets. So every year, people are asked to declare ownership in different kinds of things, different potential assets. So that might be a business. It might also be stocks, other things that might be of a concern. So when I say other information submitted varies by employee grade. So individuals making higher salaries have to fill out a form. It's actually the same form completed by members of Congress, where people are asked to report their financial holdings. And so why is that important? Well, one thing that people pay quite close attention to are the stock holdings of members of Congress. There are actually people that invest, and they track very closely what people in high-level positions in those positions in the Congress have, in the sense that they may feel like they're privy to information and they are, excuse me, better candidates for investment. So in this particular case, when I had got to a point in my career where I needed to fill out more detailed financial information, one of the things that I was advised by the ethics office, they said, I didn't make a practice of buying individual stocks previously, but they suggested that you stay away from individual types of investments because those could be perceived as you might have some potential conflicts. So one of the areas that I managed in my career was telecommunications, which is a big area. Occasionally, you would see information that you think maybe this would potentially affect stock prices and things like that, depending on some of the decisions that were made. So you really had to be very careful about what was done. But this is an annual exercise. People review these. If you make stock trades, you need to report those, within I think it's 30 days. I did not make those kind of investments because of this potential, but that would be another thing to consider. I noticed somebody's making some lines on the screen in red. If you could just be aware of maybe be aware of what you're doing, that would be good. Thank you. Because I can't, I'm well in the middle of the presentation. I'm unable to erase those, but yes, there's actually more of them. Maybe I'm not quite sure. Maybe Sanandra, could you just ask someone if they could be aware of what they're making, what's happening? Maybe they're looking on their iPad or something.
Bill, maybe you're using a feature as a pen for PowerPoint, and you need to erase what you have just written. Or
No, I don't think so. I just
excuse me, you have to stop sharing
okay.
e voltar a compartilhar and share again. These lines will disappear.
Okay, let me come back to this then. Hey, very good. Thank you.
Wel-
Um,
Welcome.
So I just discussed the financial disclosure and declaration of assets. So one of the topics that you asked me to cover was building on acquired knowledge, and this is a real challenge, I think, for audit institutions. The first thing that occurred to me, excuse me, covering this topic is that um, artificial intelligence and data analytics are really good tools, but they're imperfect solutions for now. I've seen some really interesting technology that can take multiple reports. And for those who haven't seen it, you can ask this program to develop a podcast. And there is a young man and a young woman that speak and they talk about the material that's put in there. And it sounds, I can't believe quite how they do it, but it's really quite impressive to see and hear. Although when you know the topic well, you can see that there are some shortfalls too. But until AI and data analytics advance to a point where you can put all your documents together and ask it to pull everything out of it that you need. What we at GAO have done is we find it best to dedicate staff to some key issues for multiple years. And some of that's based on their interests, some of that's based on agency needs. So in some cases, an individual may have a strong interest in rail issues. We had some people that they loved trains, and we had other people that really were interested in aviation. In my case, I did work on international affairs for a number of years and really enjoyed that. Then I was asked to take on some other work because of the organizational need. So, but it's also important to document the knowledge that you get out of the audits. And I think at the individual audit level, shared document management systems are vital. I had a conversation with some folks after one of the days of the conference in Brazil. And they ask how GAO does this. GAO is now starting to use OneDrive, but we also have a program that was developed, a proprietary program developed based off of a law firm's IT system to share documents. So each document, say it's an interview write-up or a document that you obtained from an organization, you can put what's essentially a cover page on that document listing the topic, the source, the job code. Each audit has a job code associated with it, but it allows people to save multiple versions of the same document and bounce the information back and forth, but updating it so that you have a shared document that can be edited. It can cut out a lot of rework. And if you haven't moved to something like that, I'd encourage folks to consider it. But then other ways to document and building on that knowledge is internal training. We had internal staff experts that would make a presentation at a staff meeting. We would award professional education credit. GAO's the federal audit standards in the U.S. require, and I believe the Brazilian standards for the audit courts will now require 80 hours of professional education every 2 years. 20 credits had to be earned, or 20 hours had to be earned at least every year. But that was one way to recognize people, recognize their expertise, but also to disseminate that information on a team. Another way is through mentoring staff, having a person with more expertise work with less experienced staff on an audit. Sometimes people also make presentations at external conferences. Sometimes they're asked to write articles for different journals or publications. Often there's a little less of that kind of publication, partly because there's a lot of work in GAOs in writing and putting together reports, and it doesn't leave a lot of time for that. So, but internal training is another way to do that, to build on that acquired knowledge. One challenge that I saw in using past information is that audit data is often less useful after several years. That is, the data if say you're doing an audit in 2024, the last audit might have been from 2019 and 2020. The data is now a bit stale, perhaps, and also programs change. They can change in very big ways. So I would suggest that you have to be a little, you need to leverage the broader knowledge, but sometimes that individual knowledge may be less it becomes less useful. But knowledge about how programs operate is very useful in designing new audits. And that knowledge, knowing how rail programs operate, knowing how aviation programs operate, other systems are of vital importance, especially in a country the size of Brazil with complex operations. So here's I've thought of a case example about ways to apply past knowledge to new audits. And I mentioned we had staff dedicated to issue areas. And so this is the team that I managed at the end of my career. It's called physical infrastructure. But physical infrastructure included transportation, included government operations, and some of the themes recur. So within transportation, we covered aviation, of course. We covered surface transportation, roads and bridges. We covered transit and rail. There's that line again. I'm not touching the screen, so I'm not sure what's going on there. But for folks, just someone could keep an eye on that. But government operations, it says if someone's name is popping up on my screen, maybe if they could be aware of that. I think it's coming from one of the folks on the call. So with government operations, with postal area, the postal service, the postal service in the U.S. is quite large. 36,000 post offices, about 500,000 employees. So that required people with really dedicated knowledge. But telecommunications, federal property and buildings. The point here is that applying that knowledge, the themes often recur. And so one example that I've noted here is the large system modernization. And that could be air traffic control. There's a program that's to update the U.S. air traffic control system, make air traffic control more efficient and safer. And it's called NextGen, but it's about a $30 billion program. It is rolling out slowly over different years. But having people with that expertise is invaluable. You can't get that information out of a work paper, out of a document. You really need people that have you can read something about it, but you need to also be able to converse with the people running these programs. And an audit office, as I think most people on the call would know, you can't send new people to the agency every year and ask them to, learn and relearn all that. So you really have to find a way to balance that. So then, building on that knowledge, you also have to, try to help people recognize what they're doing. And one thing I found helpful is just to give people public recognition in staff meetings and things like that, so that they are aware of, people are aware of what they're doing, but also as a sense of appreciation for their work. I am going to just pause here for a moment and see if I can't. I'm going to do this, what Susanna suggested. I'm going to stop.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to.
I turned off the whiteboard feature for everyone, so I think now we're going to be safe.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so
there is a function here, annotation. Annotate. There is a green pencil, and so people can no don't put it. No. This is what is causing these lines.
Okay.
These lines.
Well, hopefully
the pencil.
Okay. Well, thanks. Okay. Well, hopefully we're past it. But I think it's probably more distracting for people trying to read on the screen. But thank you. So I mentioned earlier that the role is sort of leveraging. How do you leverage this knowledge? You have people. I had some people that had worked in GIO for 25 years. They had a lot of knowledge, and and I mentioned the team and the different issues. One of the things, we had a role of a person called a staffing manager, and this was a person that was dedicated to working with staff, dedicated to trying to help form the teams. And there's a couple different things a person can do in that role. One is mapping skills. They can, understand the key issues and skills that are needed working with me and the other leaders of the team. So people might have expertise in statistics or engineering or healthcare. And in my team, we had a core group of engineers that supported not just my team, but also the rest of the agency. So they took on projects. One example was that people have probably seen the U.S. Capitol in news reports and things like that. Well, one of our audits was looking at the renovation and the cost of redoing the Capitol Dome. So it was great to have engineers available to look at the work that was being done to ensure the structural integrity of that particular process. They were able to also they worked with me on different projects, looking at housing, doing inspections, different federal buildings and things like that. So, but people have expertise, other specialized areas across the organization, healthcare and things like that. So, but they also helped determine the number of staff we needed to have dedicated to some of the core issues, and then help think about ways to augment some of that expertise with on-the-job training. So one thing people do talk about in terms of managing staff or leveraging skills is cataloging strengths. GAO tried this. In my career, at one point, we set up a database, and with the database, we wrote down, had people self-certify things that they knew. And one example might be someone would say, gee, I know Portuguese. Okay, that's great. But then we ask them to go to Brazil, and it turns out that, they have some understanding of Portuguese, but it's fairly rudimentary. Maybe it's not enough to carry on interviews and things like that. In other cases, people had a certain amount of knowledge, but at some point it might get a little stale. I think what I found is that in terms of leveraging skills, we ask people to work with staffing managers to identify areas of interest to them, but then we also tried to form teams around those interests too. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And so one of the things here, leveraging skills when we're doing that, part of it is you need people with certain analytical skills, that you need people with content knowledge, but you need to factor in their interests. And then that third bullet there under the first one is recognize that not everyone can work together successfully. And by that, I mean that I think everyone has worked if you work in a large or any organization, small or large, sometimes people have personality conflicts. Sometimes some people, there's certain, strengths people have or weaknesses that they don't mesh well with other individuals. And that was the other important thing a staffing manager did for my team was they could deal with some of those issues, but they could deal with them in a way that didn't become public knowledge or didn't become too widely known, if maybe is another way to put it. But you're trying to bring together people that can work together. One of the things that I learned in a class, as I transitioned to a different role at GAO, I had the opportunity to attend a training program at Harvard. And one of the professors there, a social psychologist, made the point that I've never forgotten. And at the time, it seemed kind of obvious, but she said, the success of most teams is determined when they're formed. And so for those of you who manage audits and audit teams or small teams, as you think about putting together that team of people and the skill sets that they need, that's often true. If you kind of force two people to work together that you don't think it's going to be a very successful working relationship, or people just say, I don't think this is going to be a very good one before they go in, that's often that can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that managing that side of, leveraging skills, making sure that you're putting people. Another way you could think about this is there can be someone who may be a relatively new staff person. They've worked on a couple audits, but they're ready. You can see they have the skills to manage an audit. You need to also build an opportunity so people can successfully move up in the organization, or you can leverage those skills that they have, especially if you find that they have the capability to do that. Holding someone back from other opportunities can, it may lead to more staff attrition. So let me transition to this next point, upgrading skills through the annual performance cycle. I mentioned that's something that, it's an important function of most organizations. But through these annual performance checks and midpoint, so at the GAO, there is a process where I mentioned earlier, setting expectations for what people will do. And then a midpoint feedback, halfway through the year, how are things going? The idea here is that if things are going poorly, you don't want to surprise someone at the end of the year with a rating that's bad. You need to give them an opportunity to improve. You want them to improve. You need them to improve. And then at the end of the year, there'd be an annual rating that would be given to someone. But one of the things that I stress in these sort of situations is that there's a balanced discussion. You talk about people's strengths and their capabilities. Hey, this is what you're doing well. This is what's working. There may be areas that improvement is needed. And then, in some cases too, the person may say, well, I'm really, I'm enjoying this, but, I really want to move into an analyst in charge role. And is there some training I could take? Are there some, I'd like to, or the next, my next opportunity to work on a project, I'd really like to work with this individual. She's a very talented manager. I think I could learn a lot from her. How she deals with people, how she deals with the issues, how she deals with the audited agency. So I think that the annual performance cycle is an opportunity to upgrade skills, but it's also a way to leverage skills. It's also an opportunity to learn if someone is ready to do something else. And by that, I mean, one of the challenges with having a team that covered a lot of different topics was that people could move around within the team. Sometimes people want to move to work in other issue areas, and there's also a time set up where people can move across the organization. I had an interesting conversation in Brazil with someone about how GAO has set up a process where people rotate in their first 2 years. They rotate among 3 teams. One of the long-term impacts of that rotation policy was that it broke down some of the organizational silos and barriers, because people had friends in other teams, they had colleagues, they had a better network in the organization. But that was really helpful. It's really helpful in getting a sense of how people are adapting to a new role, a new organization, but it's also very helpful in understanding. But so you see different people see their capabilities. In some cases, we had new staff that were going through, and they weren't having a great experience in a couple teams, and sometimes they really blossomed in another setting. In some cases, after 3 rotations, we saw that the organization maybe wasn't the best fit for them in terms of doing this kind of, the audit work maybe wasn't where their skills could be best utilized. And so that also gave the organization the opportunity, the chance to help them transition to another setting, another type of work. So upgrading skills is one way, but it's also, you can identify ways that you can consider areas to improve, and also to say, hey, and this is something in terms of leveraging skills that I want to mention, and that is that it's probably, part of GAO's work was doing briefings and things like that for congressional committees, for congressional staff. And there were some people that people are good at different things. And I can think I had a couple of people who worked for me in my career who were extremely good at doing presentations. everything, they just had the way of presenting, the way of talking. It was just, they were just very proficient at this. And I had other people that were very good analytically, but they may not have been as good at writing and some of those kind of things. And I remember once I had an individual who maybe this individual was in their 50s, and someone said, well, is this individual doing better at writing? And I looked at another colleague who had worked with this person a lot, and I said, I think at this point we can't expect that this individual is going to become a really great writer. But this individual is a very good analyst, and the analytical skills that they bring to the job are very important, but that's not a strength. And it can be challenging when you say leveraging skills. If you have someone who is an excellent briefer, it's really hard not to give someone else the opportunity, because this person can be so good at it and it can be noticeable. We had one meeting with congressional staff, and we were walking down the hall, and we shared the briefing between two people, and one person said, the person who was not as skilled at that said, she's just really good at this. And I said, yeah, she is excellent. She does a great job. And it was almost like, okay, well, maybe in the future, I know I want this opportunity, or I want to get better, but it's, so leveraging those kind of skills. I mean, those are other, but there's people with skills in methodology, people with skills in statistics. There are people that are very skilled at working with auditees. They're better at that. So thinking about what those skills are and thinking about strengths and capabilities. For those who might have a more intellectual bent, there's a book. It's probably in Spanish. Certainly I know the English version. The Gallup organization has a book. It's called Discover Your Strengths. And the point the Gallup organization makes is that if you're really good at something, you should try to hone those skills and be better with it. Leverage those, and don't try to be good at everything. And I think sometimes in the audit community, we want everybody to be good at everything. And sometimes, you have to say, well, this person has a lot of strengths, a lot of interest in statistics. I had one person who worked with me who he had a PhD from the University of Chicago. He knew statistics inside and out, but he really wasn't that interested in interviewing and things like that. It was a big part of auditing. But I suggested to one of my supervisors at the time, I said, this guy is really good at this, but I don't think we're really using his skills right now. And he went on, and he now manages all of the agency's work looking at Medicare databases. And Medicare is it's probably, if not the biggest, it's certainly one of the biggest government programs to deliver health care to senior citizens, or provide not deliver, but as as a facilitator for that as an insurance program, really. And but he does that, but he's still with the organization, and the organization's leveraging his skills in a way that has kept him engaged, and I think it's kept him with the organization as well. So audit team formation, when you're putting together, how do you manage these teams? Well, you have to understand what skills you need, what are the topics, prior work and knowledge, the scope, and certainly the complexity of the audit. So I know some of your work there with Decision Analysis Partners is focused on procurement issues. So there could be complex procurements maybe, or there are people that are more aware of or more knowledgeable about procurement laws and regulations. So you might need, but they also might need to know about a particular subject matter. Maybe it's waste management in the community, or a large contract for an organization, but how that works or how a service is provided may be really important in understanding whether or not the right decisions were being made for some of those procurements. So in my experience, that would also includes the right management for leadership for the project in terms of subject matter. That would be expertise, and then following that to forming the team, looking at who we bring in terms of core staff, and then making sure that you have the right other people to do the project in terms of legal support, methodology, in terms if you're going to do a survey, if you're going to do some sort of statistical analysis, but then also, bringing along people with the expertise in graphics analysis, or even communications. You need to build, I would argue that you need to build in some of that expertise early so people understand what they might be asked to do. It can be very difficult if you bring in a person at the end of a project and say, hi, we need you to come in and pull together some information for us in terms of graphics. And, but if they're brought along, it can be easier. So for them to see how that might fit. So the other thing I would say is, align the team size with the audit complexity. If it's more complex, putting 2 people on an assignment that needs 4 doesn't lead to more efficiency. It can really lead to staff burnout as well. So we're about at an hour now. I mentioned I'd like to take 5 minutes. I'd also want to allow Sanandra to take a few minutes so that he has a break. I know it's hard to do the simultaneous translation, having done it myself a bit. So it's 10:02 right now in my time. I'm going to come back in about 5 minutes and I'll continue the presentation. But thanks for your also fixing the thing about the slides. And we will be back. And this will give me a little bit of a break. And it'll give Sanandra a break and it'll give you a chance to step away from your computers for a moment. So I'll see you in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's been about 5 minutes. Let me just check and make sure Sanandra, are you online? Oh, I can see Livio, I can see you.
I can hear you.
Is Sanandra, is he back with us?
Yeah,
Sanandra,
is everything okay with this translation?
Okay, good. All right, I will continue on then. Thank you. So, so I was talking here about, uh, please.
Só
Phil,
pouquinho, então.
Yes.
Phil, you
Sanandra,
need to activate interpretation so you can hear Sanandra. That's
Oh,
what he has
okay.
just told me, okay?
Okay. So,
Go ahead.
okay, well, as long as he's able to keep with us, then I will continue on. Are we good?
yeah.
Good. Great. So the next point I want to just talk about looking at this is establishing clear roles for the team in terms of who's in, the different breaking up the assignments, so distributing the workload, breaking tasks into manageable pieces. I say ensure the balance between difficult and interesting work. Sometimes audit work can, involve aspects that could be more tedious, depending on the nature of it, but going through different records. But that I think the success in audit team formation and also the success of the team is really balancing multiple things. Some people may want to take on a more analytical piece, so giving them that opportunity is important. But people need to feel like they are being heard, being listened to by the managers and those putting together the teams. Then, another way to, this communication and managing audits, I think I'm going to just talk a little bit about this, but I think this idea of this framework, but having understood milestones and tools helps ensure communication. So at GAO, in my team, we had what we called an initiation meeting after about 30 days. We started to think about what the design would be, the methodology, the data analytics. We got to the audit design phase, and I'll talk more about that on the next slide. But what are we going to do and how are we going to do it? Then we'd have another gate or another milestone to talk about the report message and the data. And then we had a quality management phase of fact checking and review. But each of these steps, these milestones, it's interesting. We used to not really have a clear process. And around, I don't know, when I started at GAO, but we moved to working with this, what I call a communication tool, the design matrix here. But this is something that teams put together. I showed this at the conference in August. And I think I said something to the effect that if there's one thing that you take away from what I've said today, this kind of tool can be very useful. The way we use it at GAO is we have a cover sheet that would say who's on the team, an issue problem statement, 3 to 5 sentences that define the issue. Oftentimes that problem statement is very similar to what would be the first paragraph of a report. Why is this important? Managing this particular aspect of operations in Sao Paulo is very important for the following reason. X number of people, X number of dollars, or X number of Brazilian currency would be involved. And there's a problem. So the idea here is that you have the researchable question and then the criteria required and information sources, the scope and methodology, so how you'll collect the data, how you'll analyze it, what kind of methods, so case study, a data collection instrument, a focus group, analysis of databases, et cetera. Limitations, what problems do you see? Maybe access to data, maybe it's the inability to generalize findings. And then the right-hand column, preliminary thoughts on the results. And the idea with that right-hand column is you are telling your managers what you hope to say, but not necessarily that you bought in on it, into a message. So this is something that I've taught this in classes in terms of designing performance audits, but this can be a very useful tool for people doing this kind of audit work. But you have access to it in the slides that I'm sure they can disseminate after the class. Regular communication, regular and effective communication. Well, when teams are formed, it's really important to discuss the audit complexity, what you need. Checklists can be helpful. This is one area where a checklist can be helpful. How do people prefer to work? How often do you need to check in? What are people's work style? What's their schedule? Are there factors outside of work of potential concern? People's ability to travel, personal circumstances. I mean, in my team, we had a lot of younger people, so people that were starting their families. They, in some cases, it affected their ability to travel. We needed to be sensitive to that. If someone, I had one case where I had a young woman working with me, and we were in another country, and we were interviewing someone. And while we were doing our interviews, there was a protest outside the building. We were in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they were, unknown to us, but they started using tear gas to disperse the crowd. And unknown to me, this young woman had recently found out that she was expecting a child. So she went and locked herself in a bathroom and to make sure that she wasn't exposed to tear gas. And then after that, we quickly realized that she wasn't going to be able to travel anymore. So unusual, yes, but it happens, and it did happen. But understanding those kind of situations are important too. Addressing communication breakdowns in teams, clear communication guidelines. I think when remote or hybrid, it does affect how we're able to communicate. You don't see people every day. But here's some things that I can think of that I think are useful, but expectations for response time to messages, and promoting clear and concise language, encouraging people to say, I don't know I'm not sure what you want me to do here. Can you clarify that? Setting it, and also encouraging in-person meetings or video calls. One thing for hybrid teams, making sure that you get everyone's input. One thing that can happen in organizations is that if everyone is in the same room, they don't necessarily have the opportunity some of the people on the call may not have the opportunity to talk. So, coming up with a summary, what's next? When are we going to meet again? What are some of the deadlines can be a really important part of this as well. I see, I'm going to try to speed up a little bit because I want to allow time for Q&A, questions and answers, but and some of this I think people know, but I'm going to hit some high points. Setting realistic deadlines. One thing that GAO did that this might be useful. We used to allow teams multiple, many staff days to design their performance audits, and then they would set a date. But what GAO decided was that it would be better to allow teams to give them 150 days combined staff days. So that would be between the core team members. Those are days that are charged. Those days are tracked in a system internal to GAO using a job code. But we found that the jobs that took longer for the design phase tended to cost more, cost the agency more. Every staff day has a cost, and we were also attributing the cost of those days as well to projects. So that's an important thing to bear in mind. But that was something we came to. It doesn't mean that you had to have it done. Sometimes jobs are very complex; they needed more time, but it put more discipline on that phase of the process. Auditors, common issues in managing deadlines, scope creep. Auditors are inquisitive people. We like to ask lots of questions, but we also can, the scope of our work can expand. We also have problems with agency cooperation, people and data. I mentioned personal circumstances as well that can come up. So it can be, that aspect can be difficult. But I think agency cooperation can be a big one in this. So knowing that and then allowing people to know above you in the management chain is important. I think working within a clear, agreed upon audit framework. So I mentioned the key dates. I talked about like a message check and a message, reviewing the evidence. We found that was really important. And then a message agreement, a report outline, what the recommendations are, an expected draft completion. That having these kind of things helps keep people on the same path. But communication also helps meet deadlines. I, as a managing director, would meet with the senior executives working for me. And every meeting, I had a biweekly meeting with each of them. Every meeting, I would look at their jobs assigned to them, what gates were coming up, if they were likely to miss anything, if there were any problems, did they need other support, different things like that. But, I wanted to get ahead of the problem. And I wanted to be realistic about it, and that worked well. I had a good group of folks, and we used the tracking system. There was an internal tracking system with those deadlines, so my assistant was able to print this out for each person prior to the meeting. I could see what the key deadlines were. I could see how many staff days were used. I could see, anything that was coming up that we needed to, then we could discuss anything we needed to mitigate. In terms of the smaller teams, certainly a weekly meetings to discuss progress or problems is really important too. My rule is always make sure that you want to get ahead of some of these things so that they don't become bigger problems later. But the deadline control doesn't happen when you get to the deadline. It really happens as you manage the steps coming up to that. And often that kind of crisis can be foreseen. I'm going to step back real quick. One thing that we did learn at GAO was we were setting deadlines too soon in the process. And because we do the work with congressional committees, they would be, if you said, "Oh, I'm going to get you a report by the middle of June," that often works for appropriations deadlines and things like that Congress works with. But if suddenly in May you decided, well, I'm not going to be able to make that deadline, you could often have some expectations problems with the committee, especially if they're looking to hold a hearing or something like that. So we learned that we needed to become a little more flexible in how we set those deadlines, not say, we're going to aim for a particular month or two, and then as we got closer, we could set a firmer date. I was asked also about, what are things that make team managers, behavioral skills, what differentiates a good manager from a bad. Let's look at the positive, maybe the key traits of effective managers, but leadership, goals that add value, being able to mentor and coach people that are having trouble, or helping them learn the skills that are needed, being able to adapt, being able to lead in adversity. Adversity is not uncommon in the work we do. Oftentimes people aren't always receptive to the recommendations that we make as auditors. And then being able to make decisions and knowing when to seek compromise and knowing when to modify plans. I mean, sometimes if you say, as an example, we need 5 years worth of data, and the auditee says, that's great, but it's going to be too much work for us to give you five years of data. And maybe 3 years is enough. Maybe that will one, that might get you the data that you need, but it also might ensure that you can get your work done in a reasonable time frame. So you can't, and some things aren't negotiable. Some things you really have to stick to. But those three things are, I think, key traits in helping managers succeed. We'll talk a bit more. Another behavioral skill, this is a phrase that you hear about it a lot. I've actually taught a course on this, and it's kind of a fun course to teach. I was interested that you ask about this topic, but it's an important one. What's emotional intelligence? It's your ability to manage emotions and understand other people around you. So the way I think about, and maybe one example, or key elements of it, and I'll give you an example. Being self-aware, self-regulation, so impulsive decisions, think before you act. The best example of this I can think of is if someone is driving and someone cuts you off in traffic. And often people react, they honk their horn, they yell, they make some sort of gesture. But I think, there's a lot of other settings at work that you need to be aware of. There's a word in English that's been used more recently called triggers. What are things that, someone might use a phrase or say, gee, your work is not very nuanced and very sophisticated. And you might, rather than think, you might say, well, you get an argument. So emotional intelligence is really thinking about ways that you can de-escalate problems, but emotional intelligence is also helping keep people motivated. You can also empathy, understanding people's perspectives, social skills, tailoring information to the situation, nonverbal cues. Nonverbal cues can be people, in a meeting, someone looks kind of checked out. They're not listening as much. But the ability to listen and hear what people are saying can be really important. If someone's having a problem, what do you need to do, you, the manager, what do you need to do to better manage that team? What can I do to help you? Now, it doesn't mean you're always going to be able to do it. It may be that this individual is asking for something that's just not realistic, and you need to help them understand how their performance needs to improve too. But it's that self-awareness of how your actions impact others is important. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, this is a dense slide. I hope you can see these. You could give a chance to look at this more. There's other information on the web. You can, if you look at Google through Google or ChatGPT or something, you could find other information like this. But leaders with high emotional intelligence are generally better at looking at nonverbal cues, looking and helping them communicate better, thinking about stress management, being composed under pressure, creating a more stable environment. I mean, sometimes pressure is good. I mean, let's face it. We all have deadlines. We have things we need to do. At some point, you need to, things have to be done. You have to put down your pen and turn in your draft report or whatever. So, but people notice how individuals handle these kind of pressure-filled situations. Empathy and support, I think the audit world has changed, certainly since I started in it. So as individuals, work, I think it used to be, hey, get out there, collect the data. I think now, certainly what I've seen in the last 15 or 20 years is, people are looking for maybe a little more flexible work environment than we had before. Certainly after COVID, we've seen that kind of shift too. So, but these are some skills that can help managers. Certainly here as well, how a manager acts can impact or can affect morale and performance. How you act is perceived impacts your team. How you manage your stress and emotions can create that kind of environment to reduce stress. So sometimes, we have to interact with problematic auditees over access to data or people. How you handle those kind of meetings sets a positive tone. Hey, we need this, and here's why, but yelling, pounding the table doesn't always get the result that you need. In fact, it may have quite the opposite effect. But other examples, discussing an incomplete report, reacting to somebody's personal situation, how you do that can really affect how you're able to work with folks. So How do you get better at this? I think you, in part, you do it by listening. You try to have open communication. You have to think about your strengths and weaknesses. We're not all good at everything. I might talked about strengths and weaknesses earlier. And be, the ability to, admit mistakes. If you ask someone to do too much in too short a period of time and it's just not feasible, say, hey, look, I didn't get that quite right. We need let's revisit that decision. So, you have to just because you're the manager, and said something needs to be done doesn't mean that it's always going to be feasible. So this is another way to consider that. Conflict management. This was a topic I was asked to talk about, and so my first thought when I thought about my experience and what I might say is, not all conflict can be avoided, but I think as we talk about managing audits, the theme of today's discussion, workload management, setting clear expectations, and just that is warranted. What do we hope to do? Let's agree on this. But other ways to avoid miscommunication with an audit team agenda can be really, agenda for the team meetings. This is what we're going to talk about this week. Maybe you have a standing agenda. You're going to cover certain topics. One thing I learned as a manager was that I wanted to limit meetings to what was necessary to value people's time. So, as an example, I used to have a standing Monday morning meeting of the people who had my job previous to me. They met with their directors, the senior executives, every Monday at 9 o'clock. And one person that had the job, the meetings never failed to last for the entire full hour. And I thought, that's okay, but we didn't really need to be there for 40, we didn't need to be there for an hour. We could have been there for less time. So I would, when I was done, I covered the topics. I mean, sometimes we needed the hour, but sometimes we didn't. And I would say, look, you all have you have things to do. I think I've covered everything. If there's no questions, enjoy the week. You have stuff to get done. So, but summarizing meeting results and action items, following up as necessary, being flexible. I mean, flexibility is also an important part of managing audits. Things are not going to. There's a saying from someone who was a former president of the U.S. that planning is essential, but all plans change. I think maybe even more. Sometimes plans fail, but the fact that you do planning that doesn't mean planning isn't important because you've thought about things, but you've thought about your options. So that flexibility is important for managing conflict, but it's also important for managing teams. Disagreeing about audit findings can certainly lead to challenges. One of the standards talks about professional skepticism, and as auditors are skeptics, it's important to understand that there can be, a need to let people express those views, but to try to reach resolution, to, clear the air, try to find a path forward. Ways to resolve conflict. I don't think there's substitute for face-to-face interaction. If you have strong emotional intelligence, it can help manage conflicts, I think, in my experience. That's not to say, this is not, sort of a do as I say, everybody has moments where their best thinking can kind of go aside, but to bear in mind some of those principles can help with that. Active listening is important, and follow up. I know here's an example, hey, we had a tough discussion yesterday, but I think we both listened, we helped to find a solution. But I like to end it with something like, but you're an important part of the team. Your views matter. I'm glad you felt comfortable bringing that to my attention. Excuse me. But I think that's an important part of this too, that kind of seeing both sides. And last, and certainly not least, I would say on this topic, team managers can mediate some, but not all disputes. And here, excuse me, there are some things that personnel matters that can be very serious, and you need other people involved with them. One example might be, if there's a situation of harassment or some sort of discriminatory action, it may be a more serious personnel matter. And, I think the point here would be if you need help, you need support, look for people within the organization that can provide that. Maybe it's in human resources or an office like that. Concluding thoughts here, and this is to allow some time for questions, but be aware of differences in managing different types of audits. So performance audits are different, certainly than compliance, financial, and prospective. Prospective is another area that I've worked in a GO where you're looking forward. If someone says, if we change this aspect of a program, what might the financial implications be? So, but the management style will differ. Financial audits have a different type of approach, so or compliance as well. So, excuse me, think about those. I think the way we manage audits is changing. I think top-down management was really the way of the world when I started. It really wasn't pick a project that you want to work on or voice your interest. It was more, here's what you're going to do. And I think, I think we've learned that we have to be more open when we form teams and think about how we can build on people's strengths. But I would certainly say, working with developing people pays big dividends. I think the quality of work can improve. I think people's performance can improve. It can result in better staff retention. One thing that I was struck by in my role, my senior roles, was that after 2 years or so, you invest a lot in getting people socialized into an organization, and losing that talent after a year or two can be tough. So retaining staff is important. And then last and not least, if this was simple, it would be easy just to open up a slide deck and learn everything. I would say managing audits is maybe more of an art than a science. You live, you learn, you have to adapt, you have to adjust, you have to listen. But as you do that, you get better at it. And for those who are in those roles, I think you're doing an important service for your organization. So, and then last, some of my closing thoughts. I just want to, as an outside person, excuse me, thanks for your work that you do. It helps improve the lives of your fellow citizens in Brazil, but it also helps improve the audit and accountability community. In my experience, I found that most people don't thank auditors for what they do. So as a fellow auditor, I thank you for what you're doing. I wish you continued success. I'm happy to take questions, but that concludes the slide deck that I put together. So thanks, and I will, I guess, defer back to Livio and Chris and others who might have other questions for them that they want to share.
Thank you, Phil. Congrats on your great presentation. We have 172 participants up till now, which is very good. Chris, você poderia fazer as perguntas? Pode fazer em português, e aí o Sanandra traduz para inglês para o Phil.
Vamos lá. A primeira pergunta aqui foi do Eduardo de Pietro, do TCM São Paulo. Ele fala: bom dia. Em que momento os relatórios das auditorias ficam disponíveis no website do GAL?
I can't. Sorry, I can't hear the translation. I'm not sure what
I can hear you. Phil should be able to. Phil, can you hear him?
I can hear you, Ray. Maybe I'm. I see something, an annotate down here at the bottom. Oh, that's just that's another. That's some other feature. You mentioned a globe. Livio, I can hear you. If you could maybe, or Livio, could you just give me
Could you repeat the question, Chris? Chris, poderia repetir a pergunta, por favor? Eu acho que o Phil tem que colocar. Phil, you may need to change your channel to Portuguese so you can listen to Sanandra, or Sanandra needs to change his channel from channel 1 to channel 2. So Phil will listen to your translation in English. Sanandra, você me ouve? Oh, perdão, Sanandra, eu estou em inglês agora. Sanandra, você me ouve? Você consegue mudar o canal? Você consegue mudar o canal? Ah, ok. Phil, you need to activate interpretation so you can listen to Sanandra translation.
Okay.
Click on the globe. Click on the globe.
Yeah, well,
Or we
that,
can, or Sanandra,
all right, what I'm gonna have to do is go back to, oh, maybe I could just stop sharing. And if I go down here, the globe,
At the bottom.
what is it next to the audio? No.
It's on should be towards the right, not all the way on the right, but towards the right,
The more,
to the
or
left of the more.
or we can use consecutive translations.
that would be, I see
I
apps.
think it's going to be easier.
Okay,
Uh,
let's just do that.
On my screen, it's next to apps, but
I see AI companion and then I see there's a more whiteboards.
Eu vou repetir.
Oh, wait a minute,
I
there's
will repeat.
interpretation, English, okay. Is
É,
that,
that's it.
okay.
então vamos testar.
I can, yes, thank you, Sanandra. Sorry about that. My
No,
apologies.
no problem.
repete a
O
pergunta.
Eduardo
então,
de
please.
Pietro. Bom, sobre comunicação, nós temos duas perguntas. O Eduardo de Pietro, do TCM São Paulo, pergunta em que momento os relatórios de auditoria vão para o website do GAL.
Audit reports are published. They can be held by a congressional committee for up to 30 days. Often that's around the time of a hearing. There are a very small number that aren't published if they deal with sensitive issues, say a terrorism issue or a defense issue, but almost everything is published. When? They generally are the day that they are released to a congressional committee, but they can be held if, for example, if a committee is going to hold a hearing, a public meeting, they may release the hearing, may release the report at the hearing. And so GA will hold the report, but they don't want to, the agreement with Congress is that they would not be held more than 30 days. And then they will be, but generally, you know, I don't know a percentage, but I'd say probably 90%. Once they are sent to a congressional committee, they would be made public. So the committee who had requested the work or mandated the work in the law would receive the report first, but then once it was delivered, that would be put on the website.
The next question. Você falou brevemente sobre o trabalho remoto. Teria como você explicar, Phil, quais as habilidades que o gestor precisa ter para comunicação no trabalho remoto e quais técnicas ou ferramentas de TI são usadas para acompanhar as entregas das equipes?
Yeah, well, certainly you need to have a good, you know, system. One of the things that GEO uses Zoom, and I'm still doing some work with an office at GAO. You need to be able to have those, you know, the capability for either instant meetings and then, you know, setting up a weekly meeting to stay in touch with people. I mentioned one of the things in the discussion was also setting up periodic meetings with your team at least every week, so that people are aware of some of the any issues that might arise. And then, of course, you know, regular, you know, chats or emails. I think some people GEO does not use Slack, but I know some places, some organizations do that. I mentioned a shared document system, and that's also something that's very important, just ensuring that people have a consistent, it's like a small library, I guess, of documents related to the audit. And those are generally broken out into folders like initiation, interviews, data, things of that nature. So but it's not the same as being in the same location. You have to work at it more.
Sobre ética, eu vou fazer todas as perguntas de uma vez. Na entrevista
Okay.
inicial com os auditores, eles assinam alguma declaração de que não possuem conflito de interesses ou questões éticas? Como que funciona esse escritório de ética? É aberto um processo quando tem violação? E quais penalidades ou sanções os infratores incorrem? Quais são os casos que vocês já tiveram que demitir pessoas por conflitos de interesse? E, por fim, vocês têm protocolos para tratar casos de assédio moral ou sexual no trabalho?
So yeah, thank you for the question. The ethics, the declaration, I have not seen anyone fired for a situation like that. But I also know that I've never seen an experience where, I've never experienced something where someone disclosed something and then, or they didn't disclose something and it was found out later that it created an issue. Most people, I think even they understand, like, for example, with the ownership of stocks, or if they have a relative or something working somewhere, they just say, I can't do that. And people understand it. There's enough, the one advantage of being a large organization is there's always something else someone can do. If you have a problem with someone working in aviation, they can always work on rail or highways or something like that. So I haven't seen anyone fired for that, but I could also imagine if someone had a conflict that they could say, well, you have to be reassigned. And if you won't be reassigned, then we're going to have to, you would have to leave the organization. But I haven't seen that. But that declaration happens at the beginning. There was the last question was about, could you just repeat the last one, please? Harassment and things like that, right? Yeah.
Exato. Se vocês têm protocolos para tratamento de casos de assédio moral ou sexual no trabalho.
Yes. And yes, that is taken extremely seriously. Every year, managers are required to take a class on sexual harassment. Even though I am retired, I'm doing some consulting work through GA, through an office GEO has, as well as with other providers. I still am asked to take that. They're not required. I'm required to take it. That is taken very seriously, and that's an example of something where, as a manager, if you see something like that happening, it can be very important to take that issue to someone else in the organization for them to look at. But that could be the grounds for someone being dismissed. And it doesn't happen often. There was one, I'll give you an example of something that I did experience. There was an individual that was having a conflict similar to that. And we worked out a situation where the person could have a sort of a safer space while things got worked through, procedurally. But it's very clear. And this is that phrase, the tone at the top. It's been made very clear by the Comptroller General that there's no room for that kind of discriminatory behavior or harassment in the workplace. But that needs to be continually reinforced, and it's done through the training, and it's the training that happens, but it's also done through, how managers, deal with it. So if someone brings that to you as a manager, you have to act on it and raise it.
Sobre qualidade, o Roberto Alves, do Tribunal de Contas do Estado do Paraná, pergunta: como o procedimento de avaliação da qualidade das auditorias, que está previsto na ISAI 140, é realizado pelo GAL? E quais são os principais critérios utilizados para garantir a eficácia e conformidade desse processo?
Good question. Within each team, so the team that I managed, we had a report reviewer. I personally had to approve a report before it was sent to another office, but GAO has a centralized quality office. It's a quality assurance office, and there the report would be reviewed by another an outside person, and they had a form, and they would use the form to assess the quality of the evidence, the recommendations, the presentation, and then let us know if they approved the report for distribution. Now, prior to sending the report to that office, we also went through the agency comment process. We would work through that. Well, there are two phases of doing that. We would have an initial phase where before the report went out for comment, it would be reviewed internally, so that if the report was released publicly by mistake or by someone intentionally doing it, we would feel comfortable as an agency with that information. And then it would be reviewed again after the agency comment process, because sometimes at agency comments, you get you get some new data or information that's corrected. The other thing that GAO does that's very important to quality is something that's called indexing and referencing. And that is having the people doing the work, the audit team, provides the source of the information, and then someone comes and checks it. So independent of the team. So if you say that in 2023, 10,000 people received benefits averaging $10,000, someone say, well, they'd look at the source and they'd confirm that information was correct. It takes time to do that, but it really helps ensure the quality. I can tell you when I first started doing it, I thought, boy, this is hard. But as I got further in the organization, I thought, yeah, but this is good because I'm catching my mistakes and other people find things that I miss. So, and that is, I mentioned, quality has to be an agency value. And I think that is something that people at GAO, there's lots of review to make sure those reports are correct. And there's lots of words and there's lots of tables and figures. So, so it takes time, but it's important.
Sobre tecnologia, o Stanley, do Tribunal de Contas do Amazonas, pergunta: no GAL, existe alguma regulamentação para o uso de IA, inteligência artificial, nos trabalhos de fiscalização? No mesmo sentido, o Aristóteles, de Roraima, pergunta: Phil, você pode citar casos práticos de aplicação de inteligência artificial usados pelo IA? Pelo GAL? Desculpe.
That is a good question. The GAO is very slowly moving into the AI space now. It is I think it's a topic that, this is one where I mentioned that the innovation and change is coming, and I think in this particular area, I think that the concern about getting everything right and sourcing the information is one where people still need to raise their comfort level a little bit, in the sense of looking at the sources where the information comes from. I know that when I've used AI, I see things and I go, yeah, that makes sense. But I also see things where there could be mistakes. So I'll give you an example of a friend of mine who really likes technology. He and I, he sent me this thing I mentioned earlier about you can create what do you call it? Like a podcast format, and you can feed into an AI system reports. And I said, well, it'd be interesting to see what they would do with several GAO reports. So he sent me back this podcast that they created, that was created by AI. And the people sound just like two people talking, a young man and a young woman. But then as I listened to it, I found things that I didn't think were correct, and I knew the subject matter. So I think GAO is reluctant to do that, but I think we're going to see the ability to look across data sets and things like that and use it especially for maybe some financial work, or maybe to also summarize information from large, like numerous interviews with people. Let's say maybe the colleague that's working in the Amazon region, maybe they do interviews with people at certain parks or carrying out certain functions and they want to quickly try to summarize that. That it could be, I could see that as a potential useful source for that, that kind of information. But GAO is being very cautious with this at this point.
Sobre avaliação. O Sérgio Túlio de Goiás, do Tribunal de Contas do Estado de Goiás, pergunta, senhor Phil, para a formação das equipes de auditoria, é preciso identificar as competências técnicas e transversais necessárias. Como o GAU documenta essa identificação antes da designação de cada equipe? No mesmo sentido de avaliação, uma pergunta minha agora. Que critérios o GAU usa para selecionar líderes e gestores? Existe uma capacitação especial para líderes? Que tipo de competências e habilidades são trabalhadas com gestores? E, por fim, sobre avaliação, se o GAU já teve problemas de identificar pessoas com depressão, burnout ou outro problema individual e como lidaram com isso?
Oh, those are interesting questions. So first, before assigning people to the team, the staffing manager plays an important role in that. One of the things that I would do is we would have a proposal. Our staffing manager would develop a proposal, and we would meet with the managers to talk about that staffing decision. Just let me step back for a second. That was something when I started in the job that I was doing along with the staffing manager and consulting with the other executives. And the managers decided, they said, we want more input into this. And I said, okay, well, let's try it, but we need to respect the confidentiality of the process. So I learned that I needed to be more open in how I did it. I differed from my predecessors in that respect, but I think it was a good thing to do. In terms of documenting that, the staffing manager keeps track of people express their preferences. And then in this case, he or she, the individuals that worked for me were, they rotated in that position for a few years. They documented whether people were getting their first or second preference. So someone might say, hey, I couldn't give you your first preference this time, but I know that the last 2 times you got your first preference. So we did document that. Criteria for selecting leaders. I mean, there's a subjective side of that. I mean, certainly you need someone with the technical expertise, people that know the subject matter, but also are able to understand the methodology, work together. So that would be more subjective, but when we would have panels, and the way it's set up in the GAO is that as the senior executive running the team, I would make the promotion decision on moving people to a higher level, but I would be given, people would apply, and then my executive, the senior executives would make a decision about who would be on a list, and then I would have to pick people from that list. If I saw someone I really wanted to be on that wasn't on the list, I was not able to promote them. So it really became a collective decision in that way. And then in terms of training, when people are selected or as they are working along in their careers, they can be, people might say, I see this individual has potential to take on a more of a leadership position. You might send them to some sort of external or internal training, how to be an analyst in charge, transitioning to be an assistant director, things like that, so that they might say, I want to move up and take on more responsibility. And we'd say, okay, well, why don't you, take this class, take this opportunity to help you develop some of those skills. Oh, and then you ask a question about burnout. That's real. Sometimes people ask to be moved to another assignment. They say, I need a break. Sometimes people, maybe they, I need to take a couple of weeks of vacation, or I just need to work on something different. But that over a 30-year career, that's very real. And I think the organization has the ability to be flexible. but I think people, it often needs to come from the individual, because it's hard to know if you say to someone, gee, I think you're getting burned out. Some people don't take that very well. So you need to, but if the individual says, hey, I feel like I need to do something different, then I think it's important for them to speak up and let folks know that they need maybe a different role or a different situation.
Especificamente sobre gestão, nós temos 3 perguntas também. A primeira é do Júlio Muniz, do Ceará, que pergunta, no GAU, quando não tem consenso acerca das opiniões sobre os achados de auditoria, qual o encaminhamento que vocês dão? Seria no mesmo relatório ou em documento apartado? Há revisão por pares, além da supervisão dos trabalhos? O Eduardo de Pietro pergunta, lá na aula de agosto, o Phil também afirmou que os auditores são guardiões do cidadão e que devemos falar a verdade para os poderosos. Aí o Eduardo pede para discorrer um pouco mais sobre isso. E, por fim, em relação à gestão, eu não sei o nome da pessoa, que para mim apareceu só o V. Ela pergunta se você pode falar um pouco mais sobre o ciclo anual de performance em relação a senior staff. Desculpa ver se eu entendi bem. In the relation to senior staff. Eu vou ler em inglês, tá? Para ver se está certo. Could you talk a little bit more about the annual performance cycle in relation to senior staff?
Okay. Yeah, I think
E como que você faz para tentar mantê-los motivados?
Okay. Okay, so let's see. So I'll take the questions in order. First, if there's no consensus on the audit findings, I mean, one of the things I think would happen internally is people would want to look at the work papers, and they'd want to look at the evidence. So if I, as a manager of someone, if I had 2 people that really disagreed, I would say, well, let's look at the evidence that you have, and let's see where that takes us. Do we think it's sufficient? Do we think it's appropriate? Which we're going back to those standards. There is a peer review process for GAO that's done, but that's done after reports are issued. So, but that is done every 3 years. A group comes in into the org, from outside, from several countries, and they review reports and they look at this, the quality of the evidence. So that's different, but that is something that was also started during my time at GAO. It's made GAO, I think, be very focused on the processes and the quality of the information. Every year people worry, every 3 years people worry about it. Every year we review documents and work papers to be sure we're following all the standards. So I think it's had a good effect. But I think on the individual audit, as a manager, I would say, look, we have to look at the findings and the evidence and reach a conclusion. If people are violently, maybe that's the wrong word, if people are really disagreeing, then I think we need to come to some conclusion at the team level. I remember my colleague Eduardo from the class in August, so I can see you on the screen. Thank you for your participation. Auditors are, I think in many ways, auditors are guardians of in the public sector. You need to, there's a phrase in English, speak truth to power. I think that is, you need to have the evidence, you need to have the information. I had an experience a couple of years ago where I was on a plane coming back to Washington from some personal time, and I was sitting near a U.S. senator and a U.S. member of Congress. And the member of Congress, and we somehow, I told him, I said, I knew who they were, and I said, I appreciate their service. And I talked to one of them as we walked off the plane, and he said, in my role at GA, one of the things I needed to do was participate as a witness in congressional hearings. And he told me that at a hearing, he said, I look at the GA witness as the person to tell me the truth. Because you're the person from the agency that you're there to tell us what we really need to hear. And I have to tell you that really it made me feel good to hear that. He said, I look at the GA witness as that person. And I had another experience where one of the senators said at a hearing, he said, I think Mr. Herr is the only person telling us the truth here. And not that the other people were lying as much as they were maybe shading the truth in another direction. So I think, when I say I thank auditors for what they do, I'm thanking you all because you are helping shine light on issues that, you have unique information and a unique perspective. And I think that's an important role. And then last, the performance cycle and senior staff. There is an annual performance cycle for senior staff. One of the things that we had at GO is, keeping people motivated. I mean, there wasn't a program to provide compensation like a bonus for people's work to recognize years when people had more work and did more difficult, took on more difficult challenges. And that is one way, to do it. The other way, I think, is, thanking people for what they do. Doesn't go as far as sometimes as compensation, but recognition can be really helpful. And every year, GEO also has an annual awards ceremony. I mean, it's very formal. People are called up and they're given a certificate and they're recognized for a particular thing. The Comptroller General will be there and other senior leaders will be there to recognize and shake people's hand. There'll be photos taken. So you'll see people have, photographs of them receiving an award, their certificates they have posted in their office. I had one person, we had the ability to give smaller awards out called spot awards, maybe several $100s, but this one individual had all these in his office. They were all, and I thought, these really do mean things, to people. So I think there are larger events that can do that. And then, sometimes people are also, recognized through promotions in their career like that as well. So kind of a combination of things, but it is important, that idea also, and I appreciate that question because it's important to recognize the folks in leadership positions as well. They take on a lot of responsibility. If there's a problem with a report, they're probably the first one to get called about it. So you can, and there's a phrase in English that I'm not sure how it'll translate, but I'm sure Sanandra could get the nuances. But it says, "Heavy is the head that wears the crown," meaning the president. It's like the king. It's like thinking about the king, but yet the person in those roles is also under different kinds of pressures too. So it's important to recognize that.
Para não perder o gancho, o Di Pietro falou que faltou só falar, deixa eu ver, só um pouquinho, as competências para identificar os líderes.
Okay. Yeah, well, one of the things that we ask people to do in the annual performance process is to talk about how they demonstrated certain things, like leading people, dealing with different types of audit topics, or maybe different challenges. And then for the people that are applying, there's an application process for going into the senior executive service that uses different questions that are uniform across the federal government, but people are asked to, they're topics like managing change, dealing with difficult kinds of personnel situations. The idea there is that everyone's being asked the same questions. They have the opportunity to write out those answers and present them to people who review them. I think, and then, of course, there's an interview process that would go along with that. The promotions tend to be within organizations, not across organizations. And so people generally have some sort of track record within an organization, and their work is known and how they perform is known. So that also feeds into that process. I would have to look back exactly at what those questions are. It's been a little while since I've looked at the actual packages, but as a deciding official, I would receive copies of people's performance appraisals for 3 years. I would receive what they've written as essays. In some cases, there may also be an additional letter of support if someone's applying for the senior executive service. You would be asked to provide a letter talking about someone's views on your capabilities of working at that next level, generally from someone within the organization as well. So a lot of things would go into that. And then, and the other part would also be I think just someone's work history within the organization would be factored in. And that's more of a qualitative assessment, but I think that would be where other people's, judgment would enter in as well.
Por fim, eu tenho uma pergunta aqui, pessoal. Como que vocês fazem o plano anual de capacitação em auditoria?
So that would be each team would have a budget for training. So in some cases, there may be some extra supplemental training that you might want to make available to people. But generally, it's one area where we would not say that everyone has a certain budget, like, oh, here's, $250 for each individual, but rather people would make requests. Some people are more interested in external training. Other people, in terms of internal training, those are no cost to the agency, but there's a cost, but they're not to the particular team. So if someone is newly promoted or there's a new hire, the newly hired people, we have what they call a professional development program that people would go through, and there's a curriculum. And so in that case, we have to be very careful that those individuals are given the opportunity to take those classes, because if they're assigned to an audit, as a manager, I had to say, hey, make sure that we're giving people the time to do this because it's important. Because sometimes everyone would say, no, my work's really important. They can't leave right now, but we would have to allow for those individuals. And then people that were newly promoted would be also given a certain type of training. Now that you're going to be you're going to be in a managerial role, there would be dedicated training to them for them as well. And then sometimes people would ask, hey, I'd like to take a class outside, or I'd like to go to a conference. I'm doing new work. I'm in a new area. I'm doing work on environmental issues. I'd really like to go to this conference. Then we would look at the cost and whether or not we could take it. If depending on the available budget for that. So, and then occasionally there are kind of bigger types of classes that are available, and then we might be asked to nominate someone to take a class. So one year, there were a few slots available for a government-wide training program that was given in Colorado. And the person managing the team I was in at the time said, we'd like you to go to take this class. We think, you have the potential to move into another role, but this could be helpful to you as you transition to, thinking about those kind of things. So it can be used also as a way, maybe reflecting a little bit on the question from Eduardo De Pietro about, identifying people and saying, hey, we want you to, we see you as having potential to move into another role. Here's a class that could be helpful to you.
Acho que já acabou, não tem mais perguntas no chat. Eu não sei se alguém mais quer
Okay.
fazer alguma pergunta. A Ana está com o microfone aberto, não sei se ela quer falar. Então, eu devolvo a palavra. No chat também vieram muitos agradecimentos e parabenizações pela excelente apresentação.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to be with you all again. I wish you, as I said, continued success. Thank you for your work that you do. And I hope, you're working with a great team here from DAP and Ray. I would say, Ray, I always appreciated Ray when we were doing the meetings. Ray always has an agenda and he thinks about what we're going to do next. But I just really appreciate the opportunity. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. Be happy to try to answer those as well. So all the best in your work, and and good luck. And hopefully this can be helpful in your work.
Well, thank you, Phil, and I'd like to thank everyone who attended today. We still have 138 people online, and so I'm very pleased with the participation. And again, thank you very much. The recording of this session will be available in a day or two, and hopefully that will be useful as well.
Okay. All right. Well, then with that, I guess I can sign off.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Ray. All right.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
Muito obrigada. Pessoal, se
Tem
vocês
Chris-
tiverem algum comentário ou
Chris,
pergunta extra, podem mandar lá no grupo de WhatsApp que a gente repassa para dar, tá?
Very good. Okay. Chris,
Thank you,
Eduardo,
Phil. Thank you,
thank
Raymond.
you. It's my pleasure. Thank
Obrigada, pessoal.
you. Okay.
Obrigada, Sanam.
Yes, thank you, Sanandra, for his excellent translations as well.
Yes, Sandra, job well done.
Yes, very good. Okay, I'm going to sign off.